Medals, that's right.
We'll see who Melissa has found for us.
Gentlemen, hello. Our first guest for this evening, Mr. Ian Collins.
We better start bowing. We better start bowing to the great man. Yes.
Oh, any tickets for Colonial?
Mr.
Have
Collins.
improved.
Yeah, any tickets for Colonial?
Always got tickets for you, Bobby.
Good on you, Colo. Good on
Ian,
you.
welcome to Grumpy Old Men.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, I
did
know the old is appropriate. But I didn't think I was ever grumpy, Kevin.
Now, how did a young boy coming down from Sale have the sharpest elbows in the business?
Or is that exaggerated?
Terribly exaggerated, Bobby. As you
Is
know,
that-
I was very fair. Never got reported, so...
Did you ever get reported?
No, I was never there as the headie or the head-or, so never went to the tribunal until I went to the AFL.
Thank God we didn't have video on those days, eh?
One umpire.
Yeah.
I suppose you get knocked out often enough, Kevin, you carry your arms a bit higher the next time round.
But you're
it's
a
a bit
dirty
like a
back pocket
fighter,
player.
isn't it? You know, that sort of suffers a couple and...
You
so
came to
therefore-
Carlton, but you're a dirty back pocket player.
No,
now,
Kevin, I was like you earlier. I was a half-forward, clever half-forward and a clever centre man.
The story, the story in those days was that anyone under 6 foot that Ian Collins would take out, anyone over 6 foot, John Nichols would take out.
Well, it was always nice to have John on your side.
What is it about back pocket players, though, Colo? Because, you know, we've got Kevin Sheedy, doyen of coaches, we've got Mickey Malthouse, and we've got yourself, you ran the AFL, you were the AFL, and now you're Colonial. Are you still at Colonial? Because everything seems to be going right at the moment.
Yes, I'm still there, obviously, we won't let you in next week when you come in.
We know about your record with the AFL and also now with Colonial. What was it like for a young boy coming down from Sale, going to such a famous club, the Carlton Football Club?
Well, it was terrific, really, because it was a great club and they always made you welcome, and so that was easy to settle in. And initially, I stayed 2 years with the chairman of selectors in those days. So, Kevin, that helped as well.
Got a game?
So, as a youngster, yes, get a game, which was...
Did you come down of your own accord, or were you genuinely recruited?
No, I was recruited. It was like everybody thought I'd either go to Melbourne or St Kilda, but ended up going to Carlton. And then virtually, in those days, you had to go down to Spring Street and walk in and
put your registration in.
apply for a permit in front of 24 delegates. And the first question they asked you was your name, where you're from, which club you wanted to play for, and the fourth question was, have you received any inducements to go to that club? Because the cult of law was in place in those days. Of course, everybody looked at you, and I whispered back, no. But then Peter By came out the next day with a headline which says I'd accepted money to go to Carlton, and I virtually got suspended before I even got an opportunity to play. So that was quite interesting.
Well, you ran
Ian, have a cup of tea, mate.
Ian, have a nice hot cup of coffee for you.
Thank you.
Can I get you to move over a little bit?
Oh, gee.
There you go. Is that comfortable?
Oh, it's terrific, yes.
Fabulous.
Now, you might explain to people what the cult of law was.
Well, it was a rule brought in so that everybody got paid the same amount of money, whether you were a captain or just a recruit, and you only got paid when you played. And it was about £10, I think, in my first year. So, and you were supposed to be recruit anybody that lived in the country. It was fair game. Anybody could recruit you, but you weren't supposed to receive inducements. But it was rife at that stage.
The most famous case, of course, was Hayden Bunton, who actually accepted £100 and got disqualified for 1 year. They didn't let him play for 1 year. And then he came and won the medal the first year we got here. So, I mean, it was in place for a long time. I think we broke it with Dennis Marshall.
I think
at
you
one
might have.
stage.
And I think I got £100 too. So
Did you?
obviously, his £100 was a lot more than mine.
Well, when you were running Carlton in the football section, you broke every rule you could break, and then you went to the AFL and changed all the rules around so no one could break them. What was the idea behind that?
Well, it was interesting. I think the permit rules are there to just be bent a little, not broken. You don't break them.
Circumvent.
break it.
Just circumvent.
Circumvent them, yes.
That's
and
correct.
Then when I went to the league, I just, sort of changed them a little, so they became a bit tighter and a bit more stringent, and so everybody be on an equal footing.
So you found a conscience.
Well, it was a poacher.
And they were paying you
It was
well.
a poacher turned gamekeeper, I think.
Ian, who were some of the great players that you played with when you first came to Carlton? Because you had a very famous coach who had a nickname called Solvol.
Yeah, dirty hands.
Dirty Hands.
Yes,
Ken Hands,
yes,
famous
Ken
coach.
Hands. Well, I suppose John Nichols stood head and shoulders above everybody else. But you had some great players in Serge Silvani. Probably wasn't as polished as Stephen, but was a great kick getter. Ragsy Gould, who was always flamboyant.
Yes,
a
you
little
know.
bit ahead of his time.
Is it true that Ragsy Gould was the first fellow that ever wore a crocheted athletic support?
Well, I don't know about that, but he did wear a hairnet for a while.
He did wear a hairnet.
Yes, I thought he should have played at Geelong, you know, because that was the handbag
that's
in those days.
I think the best story I ever heard about Gouldy was one of the ruffians from the other team came up and gave him a mouthful and called him a so-and-so, oofty poofed and all that business. And about 1 or 2 minutes later, Gouldy sailed over the pack, brought the ball down his inimitable fashion, put his hairnet back in place and started to walk back to his position. And the fella's there and he said, Maxie, not only are you unable to play football, you cannot even speak the King's English. Oh, he was a marvel, Gouldy. He
It might have
really
been the
was.
Queen's English in those days.
Oh,
Wasn't
the
that-
Queen's English.
Wasn't quite that far back.
Ah,
It
I know we're old, mate.
It
but
was for Bob.
well, it's for me, the King's English.
But I suppose Jezza was great, and Dooley and Gary Crane.
Yeah.
So there's some great players.
What
And
about-
Wolsey.
You were very tough because in 1962 you played in a grand final, beaten for Carlton. You had a broken jaw
Yeah,
from the game against Geelong the previous week, but then in '68 you did play in a premiership side.
Big Nick did that, so we missed and hit.
I was going to say it wasn't one of ours, was it? Broke a jaw.
No, we did play against Geelong.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
The draw game, wasn't
No,
it?
the
draw?
next week.
The next week.
Yes.
And the premiership year?
68
Special?
was great. First one in
Barassi.
21 years under Barras. He did change the attitude of football, I think, in many ways. Training on Sunday morning, all that type of thing. Instead of the local barrel on a Sunday morning with Barras was training. That was more vicious than during the week or a match because it used to be the Protestants versus the Catholics, and in those days it used to get a bit willing. There'd been a few players missed grand finals because of Sunday morning training where they'd been hurt, so it was just interesting. It was a change in attitude.
If you were to
Bobby,
come
we
down
have to
from
go to a half-time break, Bob. We must go to a half-time break, but we want Ian Collins to stay with us, of course.
Okay.
Because when we come back after the break, we're going to have Bob's mailbag as well, and of course another special guest, a famous high flyer on Grumpy Old Men. Welcome back to Grumpy Old Men. Our very special guest is the man with the real sharp elbows, Ian Collins. Ian, we talked about 1968. I mean, it was a great win for the Carlton Football Club, but you missed out on that famous 1970 grand final. What happened to Ian Collins?
Yeah, that was, really, my biggest low light in my career. I snapped an Achilles on the Thursday night before the first game in that
At
year.
training?
At training, yes. I was
You were running.
souped up, actually. I'd had
On drugs?
cortisone injection and a local anaesthetic trying to get through training for the first game. I think I was deputy vice captain those days and snapped it at training, and I missed the whole year, and I was still on crutches. Very slow healer, Bobby. I was still on crutches at the grand final, so that was probably the greatest disappointment.
Talking
for me.
about training, would you be able to accept today's training of 7 days a week?
Well, I think you get acclimatised to anything because in those days you did what you had to do, and not only did you train with the club, but you did extra stuff away from the ground. So it was just different. That's all.
I never pulled a muscle in my career.
Sorry to ring the bell.
Oh, sorry.
The great
Ian,
man
time's
himself,
up.
Ian Collins. But
Thank
we've
you.
got a great high
Let's go
flyer
and have
coming up,
another
and
cup of
also
coffee.
a great mailbag. Ian Collins joining us on a Grumpy Old Men. And Bobby,